Before the corporate towers, before Steve Wynn, before the theme parks and the buffets and the billion-dollar resort fees, Las Vegas belonged to somebody else. Not the bankers, not the shareholders, not the men in suits who show up in the annual reports. It belonged to a group of men in Chicago who never set foot on the casino floor, never dealt a single card, never pulled a single lever. But every week, without fail, the money found its way back to them. This is how the Chicago outfit secretly ran Las Vegas for 30 years and almost got away with it forever. To understand how Chicago took Las Vegas, you first have to understand what Las Vegas was before they got there. In the late 1940s, Nevada was the only state in America where casino gambling was legal. That's it, one state. And the men who figured that out first were not businessmen. They were gangsters. Specifically, they were Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, a New York mobster with a vision and a temper, and his backers, the National Crime Syndicate, a loose confederation of mob families stretching from New York to Chicago to Kansas City to Cleveland. Siegel built the Flamingo in 1946. He went over budget. He skimmed money from the construction funds. And in June of 1947, somebody put 6 bullets in him through the window of his girlfriend's living room in Beverly Hills. The mob didn't like losing money. They liked it even less when one of their own was the reason. But the Flamingo didn't close. It kept running, and it kept making money. And the men who had backed Siegel, the men sitting in Chicago and New York and Kansas City, they looked at what was happening in that desert, and they understood something fundamental. Las Vegas wasn't just a casino town. It was a machine. A machine that turned cash into more cash, endlessly, invisibly, with no paper trail and almost no oversight. Nevada had no corporate gaming regulations in those early years. You didn't need a spotless background to get a license. You needed money and the right friends, and the mob had both. So they moved in, not all at once, not loudly. They moved in the way the mob always moved in, quietly, through intermediaries, through front men, through lawyers and businessmen who could sit across from a licensing board and smile and say the right things, while the real owners sat 1,000 miles away and waited for the envelopes. Chicago saw the desert for exactly what it was, a place where the rules had not been written yet, and they intended to write them first. The Chicago outfit was not like the New York families. New York was loud, territorial, constantly at war with itself, 5 families fighting over the same streets. Chicago operated differently. The outfit was one organization, one boss, one set of rules. And by the early 1950s, under boss Tony Accardo, the outfit was the most disciplined, most profitable criminal organization in the country. Accardo understood something that a lot of mob bosses did not. Violence was a tool, not a hobby. You used it when you needed to, and you kept quiet the rest of the time. He kept the FBI at arm's length and the politicians on the payroll and the money flowing. And when he looked west at Las Vegas, he did not see a gamble. He saw an investment. The outfit's entry into Las Vegas was methodical. They did not just walk in and demand a piece. They sent representatives. They installed frontmen. They cut deals with local operators who needed capital and did not ask too many questions about where it came from. The Stardust was the crown jewel. Opened in 1958, it was for years the largest hotel in the world. And almost from the day it opened, it was tied to Chicago. The man who ran it on paper was different from the men who ran it in reality. That gap between the name on the license and the name on the money, that gap was the whole ball game. The Desert Inn had connections. The Fremont had connections. The Horseshoe, the Hacienda, the Riviera. One by one, Chicago either moved in directly or made arrangements with the operators already there. They did not need to own everything. They just needed a piece of everything. A percentage here, a percentage there. In a town that was processing millions of dollars a week in cash, even a small percentage was a fortune. The key to understanding how this worked is understanding the nature of a casino in that era. Every night, hundreds of thousands of dollars passed through those buildings, most of it in cash. Small bills, large bills, chips converted back to currency, all of it moving so fast and in such volume that tracking it was nearly impossible. The mob did not create that chaos. They just learned to live inside it. And eventually, they learned to profit from it in a way that would take the FBI almost 3 decades to fully untangle. If you want to understand the Chicago outfit's relationship with Las Vegas, you need to understand one word: the skim. The skim was elegant in its simplicity. Before the casino's cash was counted for tax purposes, before it was recorded, before it entered any ledger that a government auditor might ever see, a portion of it disappeared, taken right out of the counting room, removed before the numbers were written down, gone. It sounds almost too simple, but in the 1960s and the 1970s, Las Vegas counting rooms were not the hermetically sealed, camera-monitored, triple-audited operations they are today. They were rooms where a handful of trusted employees counted enormous amounts of cash under the supervision of men who reported to men who reported to men in Chicago. The system relied on loyalty, fear, and the understanding that if you talked, you were dead. The mechanics varied by casino. At the Stardust, according to federal investigators, the skim involved casino managers physically removing cash from the drop boxes before the official count. The money was bundled, wrapped, and handed off. It moved through couriers, sometimes hidden in ordinary objects, sometimes carried on the person, sometimes shipped through the mail. It traveled from Las Vegas to Kansas City, to Milwaukee to Chicago, distributed among the families who had a stake in the operation. FBI agents who worked the case in the 1970s described it as one of the most sophisticated financial crimes they had ever encountered. Not because it was technically complex, it wasn't. It was sophisticated because it was hidden inside a legitimate business, inside the noise and volume of a real casino floor, inside the daily chaos of thousands of transactions. The skim didn't look like theft because everything around it looked like normal business. How much money are we talking about? Federal prosecutors estimated that over the course of roughly 2 decades, the Stardust skim alone amounted to somewhere between $7 and $15 million. Across all the mob-connected casinos, across the full span of the operation, the total figure was staggering. Some estimates put it north of $40 million. Untaxed, untraced, gone. The men who received that money in Chicago never set foot in Nevada. Tony Accardo received his cut. Joey Aiuppa received his cut. The bosses in Kansas City and Milwaukee and Cleveland took their percentages. Las Vegas was not just a city. It was a revenue stream, a dividend that paid out week after week, year after year, as long as the right people stayed in place and the counting room stayed quiet. Nick Calabrese, the Chicago hitman who eventually became the government's most important mob witness, later described the skim in simple terms. The money came in from Vegas. It got split up. Everybody got their end. That was the deal. That was always the deal. By the early 1970s, Chicago had a problem. The operation in Las Vegas was massive. The money was flowing. But money that size, moving through a city that was increasingly attracting federal attention, needed protection. Not legal protection, the other kind. So Chicago sent Tony Spilotro. Anthony Spilotro was born in Chicago in 1938, the fourth of 6 sons in an Italian-American family on the West Side. From the time he was a teenager, he was running with the outfit. He was small, barely 5'4", but he had a reputation for violence that was outsized even by mob standards. The FBI considered him one of the most dangerous men in Chicago. His fellow outfit members called him Tony the Ant, not as a compliment. Spilotro arrived in Las Vegas in 1971 with a jewelry store as his cover and the entire outfit's Western operation as his real responsibility. His job was to oversee the skim, manage the outfit's interests on the ground, and deal with anyone who threatened those interests. Deal with, in mob terms, was a flexible phrase. He was supposed to be invisible. He was anything but. Spilotro set up a crew in Las Vegas that became known as the Hole in the Wall Gang, a burglary ring that hit high-end homes across the valley. He ran loan sharking operations, extortion rackets, drug distribution. He was everywhere, loud, visible, and completely uninterested in the low profile that Chicago desperately needed him to maintain. He also fell in love with Jerry McGee, the wife of his closest friend, and the man Chicago had installed as the front man of the Stardust, Frank Rosenthal. That affair wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was a liability. It was exactly the kind of chaos that brought heat, and heat was the one thing the operation could not afford. The FBI had been watching Spilotro since the day he arrived. By the late 1970s, he had become one of the most surveilled men in Nevada. Federal agents photographed his meetings, tracked his movements, documented his crew. Every day Spilotro stayed in Las Vegas was another day the entire operation was exposed. Chicago tolerated him for years because he was effective. But effectiveness has limits. And by the mid-1980s, Spilotro had crossed too many lines. He was facing multiple federal indictments. His crew was compromised. His affair with Jerry Rosenthal was public knowledge. And he had begun, according to sources who later testified, to talk about taking over the Chicago outfit itself, building his own power base, going around the bosses. That was the last line. Nobody went around the bosses. In June of 1986, Tony Spilotro and his brother Michael were called back to Chicago. They were told Tony was getting a promotion. Instead, they were taken to a basement in the quiet Chicago suburb of Bensonville, and 6 men beat them to death with their bare hands. Their bodies were buried in an Indiana cornfield. They were found 9 days later by a farmer who noticed his corn wasn't growing right in one corner of his field. Tony Spilotro was Chicago's solution to Las Vegas. And then, he became Chicago's problem. And then, he became a body in the ground. That's how the outfit handled its mistakes. The skim was how Chicago took money out of Las Vegas. But to understand the full scope of the operation, you have to understand how the money got into Las Vegas in the first place. And that story runs straight through the International Brotherhood of Teamsters and a man named Alan Dorfman. The Teamsters Central States Pension Fund was one of the largest pools of money in America in the 1960s and the 1970s. It held hundreds of millions of dollars in retirement contributions from truck drivers across the country. And through the influence of mob-connected Teamsters boss Jimmy Hoffa, and later through the work of Alan Dorfman, the son of one of Hoffa's closest associates, that pension fund became essentially a private bank for organized crime. Dorfman was not a made member of the mob. He wasn't Italian, but he was trusted in the way that only the most valuable associates are trusted. He controlled access to the money, and access to that money meant access to Las Vegas. Casino after casino on the Strip was built or expanded using Teamsters pension fund loans. The Stardust, the Fremont, the Horseshoe, Caesar's Palace in its early years, the list goes on. These weren't necessarily corrupt loans in the traditional sense. The casinos were real businesses, making real money. The loans got repaid mostly, but the terms, the conditions, the decisions about who got the money and who didn't, all of that flowed through Dorfman and through the mob families he answered to. In return, Chicago and its allies got influence, got a seat at the table, got the ability to install their people in key positions inside the casinos that borrowed the money. The pension fund was not just a bank, it was leverage. And in the hands of the outfit, leverage was everything. Dorfman was indicted repeatedly throughout the 1970s. He beat cases, paid fines, kept operating. But by the early 1980s, the walls were closing in. In January of 1983, federal prosecutors obtained a conviction against Dorfman for bribery. He was facing a lengthy prison sentence, and the FBI was convinced, based on surveillance and informant information, that the outfit had decided Dorfman knew too much to be allowed to go to prison. They were right. On January 20th, 1983, Alan Dorfman walked out of a hotel in Lincolnwood, Illinois with a Teamsters associate. Two gunmen approached him in the parking lot and shot him multiple times in the head. He died at the scene. Nobody was ever charged with his murder. With Dorfman gone, one of the last pillars of the Teamsters money pipeline collapsed. The FBI had been methodically dismantling the infrastructure for years, and by the mid-1980s, the combination of federal prosecutions, casino regulation reforms, and the increased scrutiny on the Teamsters pension fund had effectively cut off the flow of mob capital into Las Vegas. The machine was still running, but it was running on fumes. The FBI investigation into mob control of Las Vegas casinos was one of the longest and most complex organized crime cases in American history. It didn't start with a single tip or a single informant. It started with the money. In the early 1970s, agents in the FBI's organized crime units in Chicago, Kansas City, and Las Vegas began comparing notes. They saw the same names appearing in different cities. They saw cash moving in patterns that didn't match legitimate business operations. They started pulling threads. The challenge was the same challenge the FBI always faced with the outfit. These were disciplined people. Tony Accardo had a rule that went back decades. You don't talk on the phone. You don't talk in cars. You don't talk in restaurants. You meet face to face, in trusted locations, and even then, you say as little as possible. The outfit had been operating under that discipline since before most of the FBI agents investigating them were born. But the Bureau was patient. They planted informants. They ran surveillance. They waited. And slowly, over years, they built a picture. Operation Strawman was the name the FBI gave to the investigation into the Las Vegas skim. By the late 1970s, agents had enough information to begin seeking court authorization for wiretaps on key figures in Chicago, Kansas City, and Las Vegas. What they captured on those wiretaps was extraordinary. Conversations about the skim, about distribution of money, about which casinos were performing and which weren't, about the relationships between Chicago and its partner families in other cities. In September of 1983, federal grand juries in Kansas City and Las Vegas returned indictments against a remarkable collection of mob figures. Chicago boss Joey Aiuppa, underboss Jackie Cerrone, Kansas City boss Nick Savella, and several of his associates. Milwaukee boss Frank Balistrieri. The charges were racketeering and conspiracy, specifically related to the Las Vegas skim. The trial that followed, in 1985 and 1986 in Kansas City, was a landmark in organized crime prosecution. For the first time, the government put on evidence that systematically documented the entire infrastructure of mob control over Las Vegas casinos. The wiretap recordings were devastating. Jury selection alone took weeks because the defendant list read like a who's who of American organized crime. In January of 1986, the verdicts came in. Aiuppa, Cerrone, Savella, Balistrieri, and multiple others were convicted. Sentences ranged from 10 years to 30 years. Most of the men convicted were in their 60s and 70s. Several would die in prison. It was, by any measure, the most significant blow to the Chicago outfit's Las Vegas operation in its entire history. But the FBI wasn't done. The trials that broke the outfit The 1986 Kansas City verdicts were a turning point. They did not end the story. They began the last chapter of it. In the years that followed, the Chicago outfit continued to operate in Las Vegas, but at a diminished capacity. The leadership had been devastated by the convictions. The Teamsters' money pipeline was gone. Tony Spilotro was found dead in an Indiana cornfield. Frank Rosenthal, the front man who had run the Stardust for over a decade, had been blown up by a car bomb in a McDonald's parking lot in 1982, survived by sheer luck, and eventually fled Las Vegas for good. The infrastructure that had made the whole operation possible was collapsing from every direction at once. Nevada itself was changing. In 1969, the state passed the Corporate Gaming Act, which allowed publicly traded corporations to own casinos. That opened the door for legitimate capital on a massive scale. Howard Hughes had already started buying properties in the late 1960s. By the 1980s, corporate operators were transforming the Strip into something the mob had never intended it to become: clean and transparent, the opposite of everything that had made it so profitable for so long. The Nevada Gaming Control Board was getting serious. Background investigations became rigorous, and licensing requirements became strict. The era when a frontman with the right connections could walk into a hearing and smile his way through was over. And then came the cooperating witnesses. Nick Calabrese, the Chicago hitman who agreed to testify against his own brother and the rest of the outfit's leadership in the family secrets trial of 2007, gave federal prosecutors something they had never had before. He was a full member of the Chicago outfit, a man who had participated in murders, who had attended making ceremonies, who had sat in rooms where decisions were made, and who was willing to tell everything. Calabrese's testimony confirmed what investigators had long suspected about the Spilotro murders and dozens of other crimes. But it also filled in gaps about the LAS Vegas operation, about who gave orders and who carried them out, and who received money from a desert city 1,000 miles away from Chicago. The family secrets trial resulted in convictions for mob boss James Marcello, who received a life sentence. Joey the Clown Lombardo, one of the most colorful and feared figures in Chicago mob history, was convicted on multiple counts, including his role in the Spilotro murders. He had spent months as a fugitive, actually placing a classified ad in a Chicago newspaper declaring he was not a member of organized crime before being captured and brought to trial. He too received a life sentence. These were not just convictions. They were the final accounting. The men who had built and operated the Chicago outfit's Las Vegas empire, or who had inherited it, were now dying in federal prison one by one. The Stardust, the casino that had been the heart of the operation for so many years, was demolished in 2007. It was imploded on a Tuesday morning. The footage of that implosion, the tower collapsing in a cloud of dust and debris, felt like a metaphor that was almost too obvious. A whole era gone in 11 seconds. By the time the Stardust came down, the MOB's Las Vegas was already ancient history. But for a long time, the transition was not obvious to the people living inside it. Through the late 1970s and into the early 1980s, even as federal pressure mounted and convictions began to pile up, the outfit maintained the illusion of control. The counting rooms still operated. The couriers still moved money. The phone calls still got made, more carefully now, shorter, less specific, but still made. Frank Rosenthal was still running the Stardust and the Fremont and the Marina and the Hacienda, booking entertainment, setting lines on sporting events, operating what was, on the surface, one of the most successful casino operations in Nevada history. His relationship with Tony Spilotro, once close, had collapsed into mutual suspicion and barely contained hatred. His marriage to Jerry McGee was in open warfare. His position was increasingly untenable. The FBI was everywhere. Rosenthal had been denied a gaming license by the Nevada Gaming Commission in 1976 and denied again on appeal in 1979. He operated anyway, under a series of technical workarounds and job titles that kept him technically inside the law while doing everything a licensed operator would do. In October of 1982, someone wired a bomb under the driver's seat of his car, a two-tone Cadillac Eldorado, parked outside a Tony Roma's restaurant in Las Vegas. Rosenthal turned the key, and the explosion blew out the windows and sent the car doors into the parking lot. He survived because the car happened to have a metal plate affalat under the seat, a factory anomaly that absorbed most of the blast. Nobody was ever charged. After that, Rosenthal's days in Las Vegas were numbered. He left eventually, relocated to Florida and then California, and spent the rest of his life as a sports handicapper and radio host, technically a private citizen, occasionally a consultant. He died in 2008. The people who replaced him, the people Chicago sent after Spilotro was gone and the old infrastructure had crumbled, were managing a retreat. They were not building an empire. They were protecting what little remained. By the early 1990s, the corporate transformation of Las Vegas was essentially complete. Steve Wynn had opened the Mirage in 1989, and nothing was the same after that. The Strip became something new, a theme park for adults, a destination for families, a brand-managed experience completely incompatible with the shadow economy that had run beneath it for 40 years. The mob did not disappear from Las Vegas entirely. Elements of organized crime continued to operate in the city, as they do in any major American city. But the systematic, structured, hierarchical control that the Chicago outfit had exercised over the casinos, the counting rooms, the money, the appointments, the decisions, that was finished. It had taken the FBI 30 years to dismantle it. And in the end, it was not just law enforcement that ended it. It was the arrival of something the mob could not fight. Legitimate money, on a scale so large, it simply absorbed everything else. Here is what people do not fully appreciate about the Chicago outfit's control of Las Vegas. It was not a side operation. It was not a skimming scheme tacked onto an otherwise legitimate industry. For roughly 3 decades, from the late 1940s to the early 1980s, the mob was the Las Vegas casino industry, or a significant enough portion of it that the distinction barely mattered. The money that flowed through those counting rooms, the money that was skimmed before the count, the money that was loaned from Teamsters pension funds and never fully accounted for. That money built the city, literally. The hotels, the infrastructure, the roads, the expansions, the entertainment infrastructure that drew the tourists who created the legitimate industry that eventually replaced the mob operation. All of it was capitalized, at least in part, with organized crime money. Chicago didn't just profit from Las Vegas. Chicago built Las Vegas into the thing it had to become before the corporations could take it over. Tony Accardo died in 1992 at the age of 86 of natural causes in a hospital in California. He had been investigated by the FBI for decades. He had been indicted. He had never been convicted of anything serious. He died a free man. The FBI agents who had spent their careers trying to put him away described his death with a mixture of frustration and something that sounded reluctantly like respect. He was good, one agent said. He was very, very good. Joey Aiuppa died in federal prison in 1997. Jackie Cerrone died in prison in 1996. Nick Savella died in 1983 before his case even went to trial. Frank Ballistrieri died in 1993. The bosses who built the system died one by one, most of them in custody, a few of them free, all of them outlived by the institutions they had corrupted. The Stardust is rubble. The Sands is a convention center. The Dunes is a parking lot. The Frontier is gone. The physical infrastructure of Mob Las Vegas has been demolished and replaced so thoroughly that you can stand on the Strip today and have no idea what used to exist beneath your feet. But the World Series of Poker still happens every year. Benny Binion's creation, nurtured in the era when the mob ran everything, is now a televised global phenomenon. The concept of the high-limit room, Benny's innovation, is standard in every major casino on Earth. The hospitality model, the comps, the hosts, the idea that you treat the gambler like a king so he keeps coming back. That was the mob's invention, born in a world where keeping the right people happy was a matter of survival. The corporations took the form and left the origin story behind. They took the machine and replaced the machinists. What the Chicago outfit understood, what Tony Accardo understood, and Joey Aiuppa understood, and even Tony Spilotro, in his reckless way, understood, was that Las Vegas was not really about gambling. It was about control. Control of the money, control of the information, control of who got access and who did not. Control of the room where the counting happened. When the FBI finally cracked that control, when the cooperating witnesses started talking, and the wiretap recordings started playing in federal courtrooms, and the sentences started coming down, it was not just a criminal case. It was the end of a particular American story. The story of what happens when you put an enormous amount of cash in the desert and tell people to figure out how to count it. Chicago figured it out first, and they collected for 30 years before anyone could prove it. The neon is different now. The names on the buildings are different. The men who own the casinos wear suits that fit better and went to better schools and have never in their lives needed to worry about a grand jury. But the machines keep spinning. The money keeps moving. And somewhere in the structure of how modern Las Vegas operates, in the high roller suites and the backroom arrangements and the decisions made away from the public count, you can still find the architecture of something that was built a long time ago by men who were very good at making money disappear. The desert does not forget. It just gets covered over and built on top of. And the new building gets a different name. But the foundation is still there.